Thanks for joining us today on Home Cooking Kitchen. We're making meatloaf today that is not your grandmother's meatloaf. And we're going to top this with some fresh fried onions. We have garlic and butter, sour cream mashed potatoes, a little bit of cream corn, a delicious gravy. And this is going to taste more like a steak than it's going to taste like your other familiar ketchup-based meatloaf. Not that we don't like that, but today we're upgrading meatloaf. Here we are again at Home Cooking Kitchen, and we have Chef Dickie Meatloaf with us. Normally he's not here on our Food for Humans days, but we couldn't resist, and our viewers asked us to please make meatloaf. So we had to have Dickie Mounds meatloaf while we're making meatloaf. And we're going to show you how to take this old family favorite and upgrade it to where it is, what think? He says he doesn't smell any dog biscuits being made, right? But we're going to take this old family favorite and we're going to take this soggy, gray looking tomato-topped meatloaf and make something that your family will enjoy from a variety of ingredients that you can customize yourself. So we'll be right back in a minute with homemade meatloaf. So today we're going to take a look at our old standard meatloaf, and we're going to use some quality ingredients that you get to decide. So if you want to add in onions, if you want to add in some peppers, if you want to add in mushrooms, fried onions, it doesn't matter what you add in as long as our proportions of moisture to meat are good. So before we get started, one of the tricks that I've always found, well, two of the tricks for making this meatloaf not greasy is that we're going to take bread. Now you can take maybe 5 pieces of white bread if you bought it. This is some white bread that we made that we're getting ready to make some croutons out of. So I thought, well, we'll just use this as well. And I'm going to cut, maybe 3 of these because sandwich bread isn't this thick. So I'm going to cut these 3. And then these we're going to make later for our croutons for our salad. And we're just going to cut these up. Now, typically, if you just had regular white bread, you could just squish it because it's, it's only that thin and you can just squish it. But because this is a little bit thicker and has a little bit more texture, I'm just going to run through it with this serrated knife and get this ready. So what we have here is about 1.5 cups of milk, just regular milk. It doesn't matter if it's whole milk. We prefer whole milk, but it doesn't matter if you're using 2% or whatever. We just want this bread to soak down into this, and we're going to take our hands and we're going to squish it. This is a good thing you let the kids do. Wash your hands, kids, before you get started. Because what this is effectively going to do is become our binder. We want to be able to work with the milk and the bread and be able to get it all super yummy because we want that meatloaf to be moist. We don't want the dry, gray ick. Okay, so we're gonna let this guy sit over here. Now you can use crackers if you would rather not use bread or if you don't have any that you're willing to let go of. So you could use crackers like this, just crumble it up, put it in a little bit of milk, and you're gonna wait until it gets pretty soggy because again, that's one of our binding agents. The other part of this, let me get this out of the way. One note, if you're gonna cut onions and peppers frequently, I suggest having a cutting board that is specifically for cutting onions and peppers. I find that no matter how many times I wash this, sometimes I'll get a little bit of that smell and I'm wondering if it's some taste. of an onion and I'm trying to cut something that I don't want that flavor on. So I always just use a second one, just like I do a second one for chicken or meat. So this is our standard one that we use frequently. Now, one thing, again, extra little trip, if you're going to be dragging stuff off, use the back of your knife, not the front of your knife, so you won't dull that edge. Okay. My trash can wasn't over here. Where's my assistant? Who knows? Okay, but the essentials to this are going to be your beef, which we're using the ground chuck that we did, just like we did in episode 9, I think it was, on Grind Your Own Meats. We used a chuck roast, and we placed this in the freezer for a little bit, not until it's rock hard, and then just put a little bit of, cut it into some cubes, put it in our grinder on our KitchenAid, and then I put it in baggies of 1 pound. I label it and freeze them. We use the chuck roast because it has a good amount of marbling in it. You don't want to use something that's really got no fat in it. So we're going to use 2 pounds for this one. And you can scale this up or scale this down. Meatloaf's a little forgiving. It just depends on what you like. Now, it's a little bit like, and I always think of this like, what would I like on a steak? You can use barbecue sauces, you can use tomato sauce, you can use ketchup, you can use a lot of different sauces and flavors. We're going to use like a beef gravy type, almost a poutine for our gravy for the meatloaf. So we do want this to taste really beefy and not like tomatoes or like ketchup. We're not using any sugar. We're using a small amount of salt. We're letting our vegetables and such do most of the flavoring. Now, this meat is coarse grind, and we do coarse on meatloaf because we want it to be able to look like meat when we see it. Now, of course, meatloaf is going to be cooked all the way through, no medium rare on meatloaf. So we're going to make sure that it's cooked all the way through. And we're just going to break this up. Now remember, this is 2 pounds of ground chuck. If you are using ground beef that comes like in the tube or the package or whatever, it is going to have a lot more fat and it's going to have a lot more grease. Again, control your environment by doing it. It doesn't take any time at all. You can even get the kids to do it. You can get your husband to do it. It involves, I guess you could say, KitchenAid's power tool, right? John does a lot of these things for us, and he's very handy in the kitchen. He's my sous chef, head dishwasher, equipment manager, all those things. Okay, so we've got this kind of broken up. Notice that it's not broken up, and even when you squeeze it, it's not breaking up into all those little tiny pieces. So we're going to take care of that. Now here comes what I like to put in it. Okay, so we're going to use our soaked milk, soaked milk, our bread that's been soaked in milk. We're going to use, let me move these knives. We're going to use an egg to help bind. If I was using more than 2 pounds, I may use 2 eggs, or if it was smaller, this is like, they call this a large egg. This is a medium egg, but if you want to measure eggs, like if you have an old recipe and you want to see, they say a small egg or a large egg, it would depend on what their chickens did or what they had available. A good size large egg is 50 grams. Okay, so we also absolutely love this smoked chipotle pepper flakes. I don't put a lot in there because I have a couple of family members who are not wild about things that are hot. I don't want my food to hurt me, but it really adds a wonderful flavor. You could use red pepper flakes if you wanted to. I'm also going to use a little bit of Worcestershire sauce. This is a great addition, but remember, we don't want to add a lot of liquid, so this is going to be scant. I'm also going to add a little bit of garlic. Now in this one, I'm not using the roasted garlic. I'm going to use regular garlic, maybe 1 clove, and I'm going to slice it really thin and then dice it into small pieces. Some sea salt, some freshly ground black pepper, and these are French fried onion rings. And you can buy this, you know, in the can or whatever, or you can just slice up some onions and make some. We're going to do that for the topping of this so you can see how we perform that. Another local favorite down here, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's everywhere, is this product. It says it's browning and seasoning sauce. It's called Kitchen Bouquet. And what it really boils down to is this is a concentrated vegetable stock that really makes things taste delicious, but small amounts. Small amounts. Again, we don't want to add a whole lot of liquid. So I'm going to wash my hands and prep up these ingredients, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to assemble this. Okay, so we've prepped out some of the things we're going to put in, and I'm going to leave out mushrooms and peppers and onions because I'm going to make this as simple as possible, and then I'm going to use some French fried onions that we're going to do while this is in baking, along with some sour cream mashed potatoes that are garlic based that I'm going to show you how to do as well, and some cream style corn. Those of us in the South, again, I talk about the South like we're the only place, but I don't eat up north, so I don't know, do y'all like creamed corn? It's a really nice Southern staple, so we're going to go through that too. So we've got this all mashed up into smaller bits. Remember, we're not wanting it to be too small. And we've got our bread that has been soaked. And you can see that this has absorbed all of the moisture from that. I'm going to start off with about half of it. And the reason I do that is sometimes it just depends. You want to be able to get that feel as to how this is going to feel. And you don't want this to be a bread loaf, you want this to be a meatloaf. So I start off with about half of it and see how much of it absorbs. You can see that bread really absorbed all of that milk, not meat. To that, we're going to add one of the best things that you can ever do if you have any kind of ground meat. You know how you cook it and it gets that grease in the bottom? Well, first of all, it won't happen if you use a good grind that you can control it. But just as an added precaution, use this in your meatballs, anything that has that sort of thing. We're going to use about 1/2 of a tablespoon for this 2 pounds of baking soda. The baking soda will bind with that fat and it'll keep it from being greasy. And no, you don't taste it. I mean, I guess if you use too much, you would. But it really will make the difference, and your meatballs or your meatloaf won't be swimming in grease. That's kind of gross. So we've got these things. I'm also adding another one of my favorite ingredients for meatloaf. Remember, I wanted this to be more like a steakhouse taste rather than the tomato ketchup sweet based. And I'm using a little bit of Montreal steak seasoning. Now, this is only a tablespoon. I don't want to overdo this because it has some paprika, it has a little garlic salt, regular salt, pepper, fresh ground pepper, etc. So it's a great all-around seasoning. But I also want a little bit of onion powder. This is a teaspoon of onion powder. I like that back end onion, and we're going to play off of that taste throughout this entire meal with the French fried onion rings on top. And we're going to do some other, I'll show you. Let's move on with this. So we're going to sprinkle this through here. And then the last thing, I've got about a teaspoon or such of granulated garlic. Put this in here. Now you're thinking, boy, that's a lot of seasoning. It is a lot of seasoning because we want this to taste like something. We don't want it just as the carrier for the ketchup sweet sauce that used to get put on here. Last to this, well, next to last, we've grated some fresh Parmesan cheese, and I don't mean the shake cheese in the green can. I mean freshly grated Parmesan. This is about a 1/2 cup. And to this, we're going to add a little bit. This is the French fried onion rings, French fried onion rings. I'm already thinking about lunch. And I'm going to mix these in here as well. Now that was about 3/4 of a cup. This can vary on what you like. So this is a blank slate. You can fix anything in here you want. And this one's going to be we're going to call this our steak meatloaf. So to that, we're going to add a little bit of Lee & Perrins, Worcestershire sauce. I'm going to add in 1/2 of a tablespoon. And we may add a little bit more as it goes on, but again, we want to kind of feel it out. And I'm going to add just a little bit of our kitchen bouquet. This kitchen bouquet is really a nice product. I mean, I've used it since my grandmother used it. It was in a little bit of a different jar back then. And it's about 1/2 of a tablespoon. I'm going to add in a little bit. These crushed chipotle pepper flakes. You know, chipotle is just a smoked jalapeno. So this is the seeds out of a smoked jalapeno that's been crushed. Go easy. So I'm going to do just 2 or 3 little. It doesn't look like much. That doesn't look like much, but it is. And you don't want this to hurt. No pain, please. All you hotheads out there that love it, add all you want to. So you can either do this by hand or you can use a wooden spoon. I'd like to try to get it sort of started with a spoon, and then I'm going to go in with my hands and make sure I can feel that most of this is combined, because we still have the egg that we want to add. But I want to get this sort of melded, mashed up a little bit together before I add that egg. Now, you'll notice this doesn't have a lot of liquid. We don't want a lot of liquid. The fat in the meat and the milk that's in that bread should carry this. Now, this 2 pounds will easily feed a family of 4, easily. You can even have leftovers and make meatloaf sandwiches. If you have never had a meatloaf sandwich, that's some good stuff. You just slice it off, get you a nice saute pan, heat it up with a tad bit of oil, pop that on there, brown it on both sides, put it on a yummy Kaiser roll, you're good to go. Okay, to this now we're going to add our egg. My trash can's right there. It's like magic. All right, so I want to make sure that we get this all stirred up. And now I'm just going to go in with my hands because I want to feel it. I want to see if it's too dry. And just get your hands in here. And it's going to come together fine. As you can see, I can hold it and it molds. That's what we're looking for. If it falls apart, it's too dry. If it is like dripping, it's too wet. So what would you do if you accidentally got it too wet? You could add some crackers. You could add a little bit more of the bread mixture, etc. It's just like baking a little bit, except not as precise, right? Okay, so let me just give him one last little. Now I don't want to add any more salt to this because that Montreal seasoning had some salt in it. And our gravy is going to have some salt in it. We have to be really careful about over-salting our food. I think we've gotten to where we really salt too much. I can barely even eat out most of the time because these places really give you way over-salted food to the point where you can't even handle it. You know, it's like, ugh. Okay. So I'm going to prepare my pan, and I'll show you how to get started on baking it. In the meantime, I've got my oven at 400 degrees. We're going to start at 400 degrees and then drop it down to 350. Okay, we've let our meat rest a little bit after it's been mixed. I want it to really absorb into the breads and the seasoning and such, about 10 minutes. In the meantime, while that's resting and getting married, I'm going to get my pans. Now, you can do a couple of different things. You can use a regular baking dish if you want it smaller, shorter. If you want it taller, it's just like a loaf of bread. You can mold it however you want. I love this little pan. It's made by Wilson. It actually has holes in it so that if there is any grease, it's going to drip down into the bottom of this little baking dish. This is a 9x5 baking dish. If you don't have this, you can always roll up just a little bit of rolled up foil, make little logs, and set it on top of there. Take it out. But this shouldn't have any grease come out of it. So we're going to take our meat. It is really moist, and you want it to be a little bit almost sticky so that you know that it's ready to go. It's not too dry, and it's not too wet. So we're going to get enough. I kind of like to look at this and gauge it before I get everything in here. And it looks like we're going to be able to, I want this to be a pretty tall meatloaf. So I'm going to place it in here and just sort of make sure you go all the way to the edges. Now, I didn't spray this or add any kind of liquids, butter, anything like that, because the meat itself will sear off against those edges, and there's enough fat just from the meat. Okay, so now we're going to add a little more because we want it to come up. Remember, this won't rise. It's not bread. I bake so much, sometimes I forget, and I think, oh, that's really going to be tall. No, it's not going to grow. All right, so I'm actually going to make this flat on the top. I'm not going to put anything on the top of it. There's not going to be any ketchup. Again, this is our steak flavoring. We want it to taste just as if it was yummy steak. Okay, and I'm going to make sure he's kind of flat. Now, this will brown off pretty easily, and it shouldn't come up over it. There shouldn't be any grease or anything like that. However, I'm going to tell you that experience has taught me anytime you have something that is going to cook in your oven, that is anywhere close to the top, I'm going to place this on top of a baking sheet that's lipped before I put it in the oven. Then once I put it in the oven and I can take it out, if it did drip, there you go. Best laid plans of mice and men. If it will fail, it might. So I'm going to place this on a baking sheet. Got it in here like this. We're going to put it in a 400-degree oven for about the first 20 minutes. I want it to really crisp. And then we're going to drop it to 350, and we're going to cook it for about another 20 to 30 minutes. And you can test this with either your internal thermometer and make sure that it's up to temp, or you can simply press the center and make sure that it's not pink. You can also do the toothpick thing too. You want it to come out cooked all the way around. It'll pull away from the sides, and you'll be able to tell it's cooked. We'll go over it when we get it out of the oven. In the meanwhile, while this guy's in there cooking, we've got the time to start our mashed potatoes and our creamed corn and our French fried onion ring that's going to go on top. And after that, we'll do the gravy. It's dinner. It's meatloaf. Be right back. Everybody knows that if you have meatloaf with a beautiful gravy, you're going to have mashed potatoes. So we're going to do a very quick mashed potato that's very flavorful. Remember that if you're only cooking in water, you're taking flavor out instead of putting flavor in. So we're using our stock cubes that we did on, I think it was episode 14. And these, of course, are beef. We want that back end beef flavor. And we've got two potatoes, a big one and it's kind of like, daddy, baby, I don't know, stupid. I get silly with my food. And we're going to use this. This will feed all of those 4 people and give you a little leftover if you want to make latkes or something like that. But we've got a medium saucepan, and to this we're going to add about 4 cups of water. For the 4 cups of water, I'm going to use, and you can see these are those cubes. Now these are boiled down from beef stock. I'm going to use 3 because I really want a wonderful taste in there. And if I look at it later and decide I want more, guess what? Just go to the freezer and get a few more. Okay. There's 2 schools of thought on potatoes. You can leave skin on or take the skin off. I like the skin on a potato. I think it tastes really good, and I love the way it looks, so I'm going to leave it on, but you can feel free to take that off if you want to. If you take it off, remember that you can always put it in your compost pile if you have one. So we're going to cut these into cubes, and it's going to be important that most of the cubes are the same size so that when they start cooking, they're all going to be done at about the same time. You don't want to cut big ones and then cut small ones. So I'm going to start off with just cutting. This is about 1 inch. And of course, as it gets thicker, this gets a little bigger. And as soon as I can get it from something that rolls, I'm going to do that. Because even though I use a knife a lot, it's still going to get cut, right? Okay, so now we've got these little circles. Now you may want to do this. Don't do it. Don't do it unless you're really proficient with your knife skills. Now I'm just going to go through and put these into quarters. It's fairly easy to do that. And this way I know that they're going to be about the same size. We want to put this into the water once it begins to boil. We don't want to have them completely fall apart by start cooking it cold. So I'm going to place this on the stove and get this going at about medium heat just to get that heat up in there. In the meantime, I'll just take my potatoes and we're going to cut them up. Remember, about the same size. Now this looks like a lot of potato, and it is if we're feeding, let's say, 4 people and still want some leftovers. Leftovers are invaluable because you can create other dishes out of it. Potato pancakes, you can do, like I said before, latkes, gnocchi, all kinds of things can be made out of potatoes that have been mashed. Now you see most of these are about the same size. And let's get this guy. Don't leave him out. He feels like he's left out. Again, that water is heating up. Now these potatoes, of course, have been washed. Just FYI. Now the other way, if you want to do this, you can. The other way to do it is you can go right through the center and cut them in half. You can cut this in half and then this way. Remember, we want to try to keep things that roll. We want to try to get to a flat surface. We actually have an episode coming up on knife skills so that you can kind of practice. Okay, so you would say that this, get back in here. This is about 3 cups of potatoes. So we're going to add those to our water and we're going to let them come to a boil, and then I'm going to turn that down off a boil to about medium heat and let them finish cooking out so that they're cooked on the inside as well. And then we're going to get started on our creamed corn, our French fried strips that are going to go on top of our meatloaf, and our gravy. Our potatoes are in our stock cooking away. I did add a little bit more water. We originally had 4 cups, but I wanted it to make sure that it covered it, but I don't want to add too much. So I added another 2 cups of water, just letting you know. And remember, no salt in that water because our stock cubes are already seasoned. So now we're going to start on our onions. We're going to do some French fried type onion strings that are going to go on top of our meatloaf. It's going to add another onion dimension, and it's really pretty. So we're going to start off with, you can use yellow onion, you can use white onions. I wouldn't use the purple or the red ones, they call them. Why in the world do they call that a red onion when it's purple? The things we go through. So on this, remember, you can either cut from pole to pole if you want it to hold its shape, or you can cut here if you want it to be a little bit where it'll break down a little more. Because we want these to be strings and not pieces, we're going to cut across the poles. So we're going to start off by just getting rid of this guy. We don't need him. And remember, You can save all these little papers. They make great stock. You know, if you don't make stock and such, don't feel like that you should. We all say that, but I do save them because it does make a great stock. But if you just buy canned stock or something, know it has a little more salt in it that you can control. Or if you're using bouillon, know that it's really not a stock. It's more just a flavoring with lots of salt. It's one of the reasons why we make our own. But don't feel bad. You know, you can use anything you want to. So I'm not even worrying about peeling this right now. I'm just going to get this guy, make some little rounds. Now, again, I'm not going to do a whole bunch. I just need enough to garnish the top of that meatloaf. Well, why didn't I just use those French fried onion rings that I put in there that were already done? Because I want these to be long and stringy so that I can make them look pretty. Okay, so I just set him on my other one. Notice that, again, we're using a board to cut it that's different from the one I normally use. I'm just going to take this off, and we're going to put this in our little bowl down here. Now I have about a half of a cup of flour, and I'm just going to drop these in there. Looks familiar, except no egg wash, right? We're not making onion rings, but we do want them to have a little bit of a coating so that they really crisp up and look pretty. Over here on our induction plate, I've got a small skillet, saute pan. I've got a little bit of olive oil in it. Butter's got too low of a smoke point, and you don't want it to burn, so I'm going to use olive oil. I'm using an extra virgin olive oil. And, you know, just FYI, there's a lot of olive oils out there. I'm going to tell you that I buy the Members Mark from Sam's. I've been really happy with it. We do buy a lot of our stuff from Sam's because it's local. It's right down the street. We can go get it. But they really have some good quality products. So I don't get anything for saying it. I'm just letting you know that it's not some beautiful bottle from Italy. It's just Members Mark from Sam's. Okay, so I'm just going to toss these around in this flour. It's really humid in the studio today, so I'm having to do it by hand. Just let these guys get a little coated. Now they're a little moist, so it's not going to stick like a batter. I just want that little extra edge to them. And again, you know, if I don't have flour all over me, how will y'all know I'm cooking? So we want to get that, I don't know if you can see it. John, can you zoom in on this? How this turns shimmery. Now, every time you pick up that pan off of an induction, it turns off. So they're really cool, but they cook faster than a regular stovetop. I'm just going to put a few of these in here. I've got it on 600 right now. Again, I don't want these so we want this long, wonderful thing. So I'm going to cook these off, and I'm going to drain them on some paper towels. And when we come, then we can just set those aside. Those don't need to be hot. And then we're going to get started on how to prepare our corn. Okay, we've finished off our onions that we're going to put on top of the meatloaf and the gravy. And you can see they're nicely wilted, a little crispy, and they're going to be delicious, made in the olive oil. We've kept the olive oil that the onion was cooked in because we're going to use some of the flour we dredged the onion in to help make our gravy. So we just pulled this out of the oven. See, everything's coming together right on schedule. And we want to temp this and make sure. So this is ground beef. We want to make sure that it's at least 160 to ensure that it's done. We have 170. So I think that's good. We want to check on the other side and in the center. Make sure that we don't touch the pan when you do this. And we have 165. So we're going to let this rest. Like any meat, we want to let it rest, let it kind of reabsorb its juices. And let's look and see how much liquid actually came out of this. Now remember that this pan has holes in it. So I'm going to, I love it when I decide to do something at the last minute and then realize I don't even know where to put this. So we're just going to put him right here. But as you can see, that's all that came out of 2 pounds of meat. So that is a very little amount of fat. If indeed it would have cooked into the bottom of it, it probably wouldn't have bothered you. But again, if you'd have put it on those little foils, if you don't have this pan, then you could have gotten away from that. So we try to eat traditionally and eat things that we enjoy eating, but we also want to cook it smarter than maybe we used to many years ago. So I'm going to let this sit for about 10 to 15 minutes and let it not be quite so hot and let the meat rest. So while we're doing that, we want to make the gravy last because we want it to be piping hot when it comes out. But we now have our potatoes ready. So gravy generally has a fat. In this case, it's going to be the olive oil that's left in here. We're going to add a little bit of butter. Here, you could use a little bit of bacon grease if you wanted that back-end bacon yummy flavor. And where the onions were cooked, we're going to make a roux and get that started. So we're going to leave these things for right now. But we're going to get that stock from our potatoes. That starch that came from the potatoes is indeed going to help to thicken our gravy as well. I don't like to throw away things if I can keep from it. Now, I wouldn't want to save this stock as a stock because it's got the starches in it. I only am going to use that fresh here. So I'm going to drain the potatoes. Then we're going to bring them back here and I'm going to show you what I use to mash them. We've got our meat is resting in the back. We've got a little bit of chopped sliced garlic that I put into the pan where we cooked the onions, and I added a little bit of butter to it. We just want to flavor this. I don't necessarily want these big huge pieces of garlic. I mean, they're not big, they're sliced, but I want to flavor this with that garlic flavor. We're going to use that in our gravy. So that's going to sit over here and kind of simmer at 600 on our induction. In the meantime, we have our potatoes. Now, we wanted to check and make sure that your potatoes are fork tender, but yet they're a little hot, so I think I'll do this. But they're going to come apart real easy, but they're not mushy. If they're mushy, you're going to end up with potato soup. You want the texture of that potato, but yet you want it to be able to give to mash. So we're going to take out some of this stock, and we're going to add this stock over here when we're ready for our roux to start. But we don't want to start that until we finish it. So we're just going to use a measuring cup, and we're going to get out some of the stock from the potatoes that we're going to use in the gravy. Earlier I had mentioned gravy or a poutine because we were going to be using it over mashed potatoes. Of course, that's a Canadian dish used over French fries and cheese curds. Who does not love the Canadians? Oh my gosh, those guys, that's great. But this is going to be just a regular beef gravy because we don't have cheese curds and it's mashed potatoes. I think you could use a poutine even over chicken, but it does have a ketchup and a vinegar base to it, whereas we're not going to have that here. So I don't know how much stock I'm going to want. Better to have too much than too little. So we're going to go about here. Now I'm going to leave a little of the stock to use to mash these potatoes. Okay, so we've got, there's 4 cups, maybe about 2 cups. So I'm going to drain these potatoes while reserving the rest of this. We want a little bit in there. We're going to get some butter, some sour cream, some garlic powder, and a little bit of, did I say heavy cream already? I just zoned out. We're definitely going to use some heavy cream. So I'm going to drain these, and I'll be right back, and I'll show you how we mash them. Okay, so we have, I really hate it when I do that. I try so hard not to say, okay, so. I guess it's because it's one of my favorite things to eat. Okay, I digress. Let's move on with potatoes. We've drained those and left a slight bit of liquid in the bottom from our stock because we want this to retain that really yummy, stocky flavor as well. Now these potatoes have no salt, no pepper, nothing added to it other than what the stock cubes had in it. So to this, we're going to add, and this is going to be to your eye. I'm going to start with about a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. And I'm going to put in about maybe a 1/8 of a cup of sour cream. And we're going to put in a little bit of salted butter. If y'all missed our segment on how to make your own butter, I think that was the episode right before this, which is like 14. And we're going to add a little bit of pepper to start. Now, y'all know we love some black pepper around here, but I'm just giving it 1 pinch. I'm going to take my wooden spoon and kind of stir that around just a little bit. I want to coat these potatoes. Now, you can see how wet this is. We have a lot of liquid in here because we want these potatoes to be smooth and chunky all at the same time. We're going to use, you know what this is? How many of you have this at home? You can buy all the fancy stuff you want to, and the same thing your grandmother and your mother used still works, potato masher. Now remember, these have the skin on, so we're going to keep those little chunks in there with that skin, and it smells right now just like a baked potato. And we don't want it to get too mushy. This is kind of, I guess you would call it rustic. We like it chunky. Okay, so now, after very little mashing, we have potatoes that look like this. They're chunky and yet they're creamy, and I'm going to taste it for salt because we haven't added any yet except for what was in the stock that we cooked the potatoes in. So I'm going to grab a spoon here, and I'm going to grab just a little bit. I thought I had a plate here. I don't. So we're going to use this lid. You know how you do. We're not fancy here. Okay, so the flavor is good, but we do need some salt. I add it last on these potatoes. We're using flaked sea salt here on a fine grind. And I'm going to do 2 pinches. Now this salt will continue to get in here and mix as it sits. I like to let foods kind of sit a little bit right before you serve them. Okay, so we'll just grab a little bit of this, put it on here. Now let's see if we have the salt. 2 pinches was exactly what it needed. Who does not love a mashed potato? Now remember that we're going to have gravy with this, and we're also going to have some of the onions and the corn, which is what we're going to work on next, because I'll tell you, it's been done. It's easy peasy. So we're going to let this not be too salty. We don't want to add a lot of salt. I'm going to cover this to keep this nice and moist, and as I'm going to set it off to the side, make sure you don't set it back on the burner. Even if it's off, it's got residual heat. You can see that the steam is coming up in here, and we want to keep these nice and fluffy. Now, here we have our corn. I like to use, if I can't get fresh and then take it off the cob, then I like to use frozen corn. Frozen corn is fresh and it's crisp, and we've got about a cup here. Remember, we're only looking for about 4 people. You can make this in whatever quantity that you want. I've cooked it in here with a couple of nothing but the beef stock cubes. Again, we want it to be reminiscent of the rest of our food, but we don't want this soggy yet. We're going to take half of this out, and then we're going to use a fun tool that we lovingly refer to as the motorboat. I'll be right back with that. We're back to our corn. Now, I've taken about half of it out and just placed it over here. Remember, there's really no liquid in here. All we had was just those couple of cubes of stock. And what we're going to do now is make this creamy. So to this, and this is just a little bit of corn because we want to add that cream to it without it being gross. That's about 2 tablespoons of cream. And then we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to stir this around a little bit, and we're going to use the immersion blender, or the motorboat, as we call it. The ones in the restaurants, like in our old restaurant, man, it was huge. It was great fun. But you have to be careful with the men in your family. They kind of get carried away with that. So this one's made by Braun. Gosh, I've had it, I don't even know how long. It's just a simple go, and it's made to immerse into a liquid. So we're going to come in here, and we're going to make these little corns all nice and squished up with this. Did you like that? I don't have a lot in here. If there was more in it, it would stay under it a little bit more. Oh, this is just turning into a mess. I try to not make very much because what happens is that comes out the side when we do it, and we don't have a lot in here. So we're just going to do it like this and keep on going. There's never any time you're going to come out of the kitchen clean unless you ordered it in. And just do it. Just get it. Right? I may have to. Everybody always knows if I've been eating or cooking. I got food all over me. Okay, so now we have this corn kind of creamed down a little bit, and we're going to add back in the rest of our corn. Give it a quick stir, and we're going to put this back on the stove just to keep it nice and warm. I'm going to add a little bit more butter to this. Now, my grandmother used to always put sugar in her corn. I'm not sure that we really needed to. It was tasty. So if something is sweet already, you can certainly add a little bit of sugar, but we're not going to in this. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper. It's about a pinch of black pepper. And again, not over salting this, because we have a lot of salt that's been in different components. So now it sort of looks like this. And you can see it's got a little liquid, a little smash to it. We're going to put that on the stove on low. And let that stay warm. Look at this mess. Trust me, if you have enough liquid to cover the bottom of the immersion blender, it will not do that. But nobody said this was like going to be without the mistakes that you may make, right? Okay, so let's turn to our gravy. It's the last part that we have. Now we've taken, this is the olive oil that we sauteed the onions in, the butter, and then we have some garlic, but we're going to take this garlic out. Once this garlic has given up its goodness, we really don't want it anymore. And I'm just going to move him right here. Now we don't want to eat that. Nobody wants to eat chunks of garlic. Well, I better not say that. Somebody will write in and say, yes, I do. I love chunks of garlic. Well, okay. Not this kind. All right, and now we've got a little bit. Let me get every piece out because I don't want it in there. Now, I'm not going to make a lot of gravy, but you can make a lot of gravy if you want to. And it does. You can put it in a jar and save it for leftovers or whatever. We're going to start to add back some of the flour that we dredged those onions in. Again, don't throw things away if you don't have to. So the rule of thumb is the same amount of flour as you have fat. So this right here is probably 2 tablespoons. Let's test that theory. Where'd my tablespoon? What is happening today? We're in an alternate universe. Okay, so we're going to go like this. I know about how much 2 tablespoons looks like. And it's going to start to come up. One more. All right, let's see how this does, shall we? We're going to just stir this around. Now this isn't on, I can't pick this up and show you because the minute I pick this up, this will stop working. Okay, so now we have a roux, and I'm sure that we can kind of come in on this. It's going to look really super dark. And John, can you come in on that a little bit? He's over here getting me my tablespoon that I don't need anymore. Okay, so we've got kind of this dark roux right now. So before we start to add any of our milk to this, we're going to add some stock. Now I'm going to add, this is mainly a clear, not a cream gravy, but I am going to put a little bit in. So here we have our stock. This was the beef stock that we cooked our potatoes in. And I'm going to add this in. You can hear it start to sizzle. And because we have both a roux and the starch from those potatoes, this is going to turn into a nice thick gravy. Now, what's the difference between a sauce and gravy? Well, I don't know about you, but gravy is kind of thick. Sauce is generally a little bit thinner, a little more refined. So you can see now that it's sort of incorporated, and it's going to start to thicken. Now this will thicken quickly, so you kind of have to stay on it. But now we need to do a little seasoning. We're going to add, now this color brown, while it's delicious, is not what I'm looking for, but I'm going to get a little bit of our kitchen bouquet, and I'm going to see if my cameraman will hand that to me because I already put it up. It's one of those days at Home Cooking Kitchen. You never know what's going to happen. Cameraman, sous chef, person who gets what I forgot, we're going to add just the tiniest bit, about a quarter of a teaspoon. You want to be careful because it really does. A little goes a long way. And I'm going to show you how it ends up looking. And then we're going to check it and see if we need any salt or pepper. So in this is the original olive oil that we fried off the onions in. It has a little bit of the garlic that has been fried off in here. And it has some stock that we used from the potatoes, a little bit of flour. And so it's kind of this consistency right now, which is perfect. We don't want this to be too thick. So now we're going to test this for a little bit and see how that salt is. I wish you could taste it. It's so good. But we are going to add a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper to this, and right before we add our cream. So I'm going to add a pinch of flaked sea salt, a little bit of ground pepper, and I could leave it just like this, but I'm going to add, as it starts to come off of here, I'm going to add just a little bit. I mean, this is ready to go. I don't know. Can you see how it's not thick and lumpy? You ever had lumpy gravy? We eat it anyway, don't we? Here in the South, we'll eat that. I'm going to add just a touch, like a half a teaspoon of heavy cream. Just a little. I just want to kind of give it a little bit of creaminess, but I don't want it to be a cream type gravy that's based off of milk or cream. Okay, so now our wonderful gravy is ready. And here's a little thing I like to do. I'm going to turn this off. Whenever I do a sauce or a gravy, I love it to have a little, let me move this guy out of the way. I love it to have a little bit of a sheen to it. So, I'm a mess. Yes, this is how it always looks. What are you talking about? Well, you know, you got to cook, right? It's off the heat right now, and I'm going to add just about a half of a tablespoon of butter. And when we do that, off the heat, it's going to melt in here and it's going to make this shiny and it's going to add a little bit of richness to it. Now, right now, we have garlic, onions, a little bit of olive oil, butter, some beef stock, starch from the potato water, a little bit of salt and pepper, and we're going to finish it off with this butter. Okay. So, you know, you could really just eat this. My son always says, you know, Mom, you're a good cook, but you're really good at sauces. It's my thing. I have volumes of books on nothing but sauces. So we're going to show you how to plate this up, how to serve it, and then I think we're going to have some lunch. We are ready to plate up this dinner. And one of the things that I think all of us, especially us Texans, have trouble with is a little thing called portion control. So we're going to plate this to where it looks really pretty, but it's not going to be a huge amount of food. I've cut our meatloaf into little squares rather than the big, you know, cut it, looks like a loaf of bread. We have our mashed potatoes, we have our corn, and we have our gravy with our little bit of onions on top. So we're going to stack this in the way we want people to taste it. You know, the old days of 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 6 o'clock, here's your protein here, you know, kind of gone. We need to make our food more appetizing and the way we want it tasted. So if we're cut from the top down, we're going to get this really umami flavor from these onions, get into the steaky taste of that beef, get into those creamy part of that cool potato that's underneath it, and finish it off with a little bit of corn with the gravy on it. That is the perfect bite. So we're going to build that for our guests. We're going to start off with a little bit of our corn, and I'm just going to put it around the edge because we want them to be able to drag through it. Next, we're going to start with a little bit of potatoes, and we're going to put those right here. Now see, they're still chunky, they're still potato-y, they're not soup. Now, I have nothing against really finely riced potatoes, but this is a really rustic dish that we don't want to have that. And then we're going to take out our, now this meat has rested, and we're going to take out 1 cube. Now you see, the cube is prettier, I think, than is just a loaf. And I am a food photographer, and everybody, I guess, probably knows that. They're like, do you really do all? Yeah, I really do. I really do. We're going to take so here's the front of our dish, and we're going to take the tiniest bit of our gravy. Now again, this is to go with it, not to cover it, although you may want to. And then we're going to take a few of our crisped onions and put right up on top. Now I'm going to serve this with a side salad, generally mixed spring greens with some strawberries, maybe some balsamic, a little bit of the cheese that's in here. But right now, this is how our meal is going to look. So if you serve this to your family, trust me, this doesn't look like a lot, but it is enough, and you will absolutely love this dish. I hope you've enjoyed joining us for Meatloaf today with myself and Chef Dickie Meatloaf, who's not in the kitchen while we're cooking. Don't worry. Will he get a little piece of meatloaf? Yes, he will. All of you haters that say don't give your dog human food, Mr. Meatloaf is not really a dog, so he's going to get a tiny smidge. Enjoy. Be sure and subscribe to our channel. If you make this, comment in the bottom. Show me a picture of what you've done. I'd love to see it. And if you have other things that you would like for me to make, just contact us through our Facebook page or through our YouTube channel, and we'll get it on for you. Enjoy your meatloaf. It's not your grandma's. Have a good day.